welcome to FinextraTV. I'm Hannah Wallace, and we're here at Merchants Payments Ecosystem 2020 in Berlin. Kindly joining me now in the studio is Alexa Devlukier from Payments Sold and Martin Sweeney from Ravelin. Hello to the both of you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, Hannah.
So we're talking about PSD2 and strong customer authentication in 2020. But my first question goes to Martin. You've just been on stage today talking about a re-energizing and prioritizing of PSD2 preparation. But for those that weren't there, can you tell us what you covered?
Sure. So I think it was mainly about not taking your foot off the pedal. We've been given an extension, much needed time, but make sure that you really capitalize on that advantage. That means particularly making sure you've got 3D Secure on all of your apps and websites. That will take longer than you think, and you need to get started right away. And secondly, not taking what you're given from the regulated players. Issuing and acquiring banks, you need as a merchant to take back control. You need to have control over your user experience, and in practice that means exemptions, transaction risk analysis, fraud detection, and understanding what is going to happen before you process that payment.
All right, some good advice there. And now, Alexa, coming to you. I know you were a policy lead for FCA, so I'd love to hear a bit more about your role and relationship with PSD2, and we'll go from there.
So my relationship with PSD2, I think you could say, Hannah, was intimate because I was at the FCA just before the proposal was published. So I worked with UK government and the FCA and European regulators all through the negotiations, all of the implementation, the policy lead for the FCA approach document, and I worked with my fellow regulators in Europe on all of the PSD2 mandates, including the RTS on FCA.
All right, and can you tell us why is it so critical for consumer and merchant and their awareness around SCA implementation? Why is it so important?
It's important obviously for all of industry, but particularly for merchants because they don't want to face cart abandonment. You know, they want their payments to flow, they want the money in their cash till, so to speak, and therefore it's important that they're geared up and ready to understand how it's going to impact them and what they can do to mitigate their own risks of cart abandonment. But it's also important for consumers, not that they need to know this is SCA, what they need to know is this is extra protection against fraud, because that's what SCA is all about. It's about mitigating particularly card not present fraud, which is something that we all have a vested interest in.
That's interesting. Well, then looking ahead, what can we expect to come after SCA? What's next?
Well, there's practical things like there needs, in my opinion, to be a change in the RTS to accommodate some of the changes in technology that can make these secure checkouts more user-friendly. There needs to be, obviously, an accommodation of the technological changes that we face going forward. It needs to be also holistic, I think. And so probably I think that we're going to move away from maybe having to authenticate every payment transaction to more of a digital identity solution, so that, as was said in the panel that I was speaking in, it's more of a check-in process rather than a check-out process.
So still some way to go then?
I think that industry and probably technology is pretty much there. There's a little way to go for, I think, the regulation to catch up so that it's not as prescriptive as we have today and can allow for this innovation and competition that all regulators and actually industry are looking for.
All right. Well, that brings me quite nicely on to my next question. What have been the lessons learnt through the PSD2 and SCA project?
I think everyone underestimated quite how complex it is. And I think, as we've just heard, the regulations are quite restrictive sometimes. And when the consultation period was going on, industry made its feelings very clear about some of the approaches that they would have liked to see, and that was definitely reflected in some of the revisions. But I still think it ended up in a place that was not really fit for the modern world. I think it may have been fit for that day, but not necessarily for day plus one. And I think my surprise has been how the timelines were so ambitious, given that it would have taken not too much to ask the industry, how long will this take? Instead of saying, do it in a year's time. And the industry would have said, well, it will take 3 years. And it will take 3 years. And the regulations will be broken until that point, or they've been extended so we can meet that point.
Is there anything you'd like to add, Vince?
I think there's lessons learned on many different levels. I think from a regulatory perspective, it is never or do not underestimate the time it takes industry to implement technological change. If you think this is a regulation that says to all of Europe, on this day, you must be working to these rules and requirements, but underneath all of that is massive technological change. I think there's also lessons learned for industry, that payments is about an ecosystem. It's not just a one-person solution. And I think that we've seen that evolution over time, that industry is now working together, finding collective solutions, because at the end of the day, it's got to work well for everybody.
All right, so would you say that we need a reorganised oversight of the industry, and what would that look like?
Well, I think it's clear that when you have 27 member states, all with their own national competent authorities, then you're going to have lots of different regimes. And I think it's been slightly disappointing that the EBA didn't take the opportunity to just impose a blanket deadline. I think the later clarification has certainly helped, but there's always that tension in the federal system. So having that local versus the national is always something. But I don't necessarily think that it needs to be torn up and started from scratch. But it's clear that there is a disconnect between the ambitions of the initial regulation and the implementations in the reality.
And Alexa?
I don't think there's a need for reorganisation. I think there is a much clearer path for cooperation now going forward, from the Commission to national competent authorities to industry. And we've seen that when that has worked well, industry have a path, they know what they have to do and they know what they have to implement and they know by what timelines, where in this situation there have been extensions. So if you look at all the publications that are particularly coming out of the UK Finance, the Industry Association in the UK, that's been agreed with industry, agreed with the regulator, everybody knows what the happy path is.
Great, well you've certainly set the scene for us there, and I think it's safe to say some interesting developments ahead.
Yep.
Alexa, Martin, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I'll let you get back to the event.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.